Welcome to SR Studios Inside the Issue. I'm your host, Casey Pitcher. With us today is Will Musgrove, whose story, The Puzzle, is featured in the fall 2025 issue of Southern Indiana Review. Will Musgrove is a writer and journalist from Northwest Iowa. He received his MFA from Minnesota State University Mankato. His work has appeared or is forthcoming in Florida Review, Wigleaf, Cincinnati Review, Passages North, Tampa Review, and elsewhere. His debut flash fiction collection, After Last Call, will be published by Malarkey Books in 2027. Will, welcome Inside the Issue.
Thank you, Casey. I really appreciate you giving me an opportunity here to kind of talk about my work. Um, I don't get a lot of time to do these kind of interviews and whatnot. So whenever I get a chance, it's always cool to kind of
Yeah.
get in front of somebody and kind of talk about writing and craft and everything in between. So
Yeah, I'm excited. I really like the story, and I'm excited to hear a little bit more about it. So with that said, do you mind reading the puzzle for us?
yeah,
Thank you.
all righty. The puzzle. We found the glued together puzzle on my last night in town. A framed picture of an owl perched in a tree. It sat leaning against a dumpster outside an apartment complex a few blocks from our place. We were walking to Paradise, the only bar left in town where you could still get a picture of bush life for under $10. Without saying a word, my roommate Fred snagged the puzzle we walked past as if to show me all the crazy stuff I'd miss out on once I was gone. My mom also used to glue puzzles together. Doesn't seem right, she'd say. All that work for it just sit boxed up in the closet. To her, you do a puzzle once. You don't tear it apart to rebuild later. Why go through all that trouble? You already have the complete picture. We arrived at Paradise, Fred still carrying the owl puzzle, and ordered a celebratory pitcher. I'd landed a construction gig a state over and was starting that following Monday, which meant I could quit my shitty job at the gas station where Fred also worked. It also meant we no longer had passed the time on the clock playing Chip Horse, a game that involved making trick shots with bags of Doritos. When I got up for another pitcher, Fred told me to sit, said it was my party, and headed for the bar. I could tell he was trying not to show he was pissed off. My new job didn't pay any more than my old one, and he knew it. Probably thought I took it to get away from him. He had nothing to do with why I was leaving. I was basically piecing together the same life, but pretending like I hadn't seen the picture on the top of the box. I didn't know how to explain this to Fred, that I was simply better at going somewhere than knowing where I was. Fred had left the puzzle behind, propped up in his chair so the owl was staring at me. What was I supposed to do? I asked, not making eye contact, instead focusing on the faint lines where the pieces interlocked. We called it a night after the second pitcher, way earlier than usual. I needed to pack. During the walk home, I tried gluing Fred together, tried memorizing everything about him, how he moved, how his laugh sounded like a sputtering lawnmower, unsure if I'd missed him that much or if I just felt guilty. After he went to bed, I snuck the owl puzzle out of Fred's room and smashed it against the wall. The frame splintered, the glued together pieces scattered. That way, once I was gone, we could each believe we were piecing together something new.
All right, thanks. That was really nice reading. So can you tell us a little bit about where this story came from?
So I tend to write a lot about stuckness or these characters that are kind of trapped in these situations. And at the time, my wife was sort of in between jobs. She was at her previous job for about like 8-ish, almost a decade. So there wasn't a lot of kind of like excitement there anymore. And the new job she was going to, there was a lot of what ifs. And so I was interested in that kind of like the in-between place where eventually that new job would become just another job, would become another routine. Interested in the idea of kind of how we kind of break free of that stuckness. And at the same time, I was on the phone with my mom, and I don't remember why she brought it up, but there used to be a framed owl puzzle that was kind of hanging in our old house when I was growing up. And I thought that would just be like a perfect kind of metaphor artifact to kind of symbolize this idea of a life as you slowly piece it together. And as you get further and further, the glue hardens and it's harder to break that out of that kind of routine. And so, yeah, just from there, the piece sort of kind of grew into this flash piece. So
That's cool. I always like hearing where, like the owl puzzle being this artifact from your past. I'm always intrigued by when I talk to writers, there's these the ways in which writers' minds work, right? Where we're pulling from different things and kind of collecting this I don't know, this collage of stuff that we're
Yeah.
making use of in ways that, you know, don't make sense on the surface, but make perfect sense in to use, like you said, as you call it, like an artifact. That's a wonderful way to talk about it, right? This artifact
Yeah.
that you can place in the story that if you hadn't, the story would lose its sort of central metaphor, right? Like it really does hinge on that owl
Yeah. And I
puzzle.
think kind of growing up, came from kind of like a low class family, and we didn't have a lot. And there was always that feeling of like we were never moving forward, never kind of progressing. And I think that's where my kind of I write about stuckness or characters that feel trapped or like they feel like they're on the outside of life looking into something. And I think that where that kind of comes from. And even though I feel like I'm doing a little bit better now, there's still kind of whatever reason this guilt that's inside me that feels like I should still be in the trenches there, uh, struggling, I guess. And so I think that's why writing about this stuckness and about the ideas of like how when we get older, routine sort of comes to define us, and how we kind of avoid stagnation and not let, life just kind of speed by, uh, kind of, resonates so much with me. And I think I'm constantly kind of through that to trying to figure out why back then I never had enough. So now, I'm able to kind of breathe a little bit and not be kind of worried about the lights being shut off or whatever. And so it's, very therapeutic in that way.
Yeah. Um, it's worth noting too. I don't know if you've gotten a chance to look at any of those stories in this issue, but we have three flash fiction pieces that feature owls.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And it was not on purpose. It was just, one of those strange things that happens. But so there are four Flash pieces in this issue. Allison Hagee, we have two of hers, but one of her two has an owl in it, and Matt Jones' story Portent has an owl in it. So it's we did have a conversation around the office, like, this is weird, right? That we have all these. Can we have, are we trying to say something with these three stories? But it was just kind of one of those happy accidents that they all three Flash pieces prominently feature an owl. Um, so what was your process like for this story, and even more broadly, what's your process like?
So kind of an anxious person. And I think my process is sort of, emulates that a little bit. When I write, people think flash fiction, they think about, everything having to be this perfect, every word has to be doing double duty. Mine's sort of chaotic where kind of what I was talking about, we were mentioning the artifacts. I'm constantly grabbing things and piecing things together, like little notes I write down here, things in my notes app on my phone or whatever it may be. And they kind of come together as that sort of collage. I like to imagine my process as not like crafting like a perfect little miniature model, but more of like a snowball that is slowly rolling downhill and picking up like kind of junk and sticks or whatever that may be. And it's kind of dirty at the end. And of course, you go back and you kind of pick through what's not serving the piece, like there might be a twig here or a leaf here that's not really helping the story at all. But something about like I really want my stories to have kind of a sense of like that they're not like super well manufactured, and then there's like a rawness to them, and I think that gives them some authenticity because I do write a lot about characters that are sort of uh, screw ups, everyday man, and I think that authenticity kind of gives credit to the story and allows those characters to kind of shine a little bit more. So
I really like that metaphor of the snowball collecting stuff. That's a really cool metaphor for writing a story, flash fiction or not, right? Just this idea of yeah, just as it builds momentum, it picks up more and more things that sometimes serve the story and sometimes need to be cut, but it's all kind of
yeah,
part of the process. I like that metaphor.
that's how kind of like when I actually go to start writing the story too, is like where, I don't really, I tried to just not like inhibit myself and just sort of write and write and write. And then a lot of the times when I have a draft, it's way over that 1,000 word limit. But then when I go back and start to sort of take out that stuff that kind of collected in the snow that's not there, that really doesn't serve the story, then it, usually shrinks back down or melts or whatever you want to say to
Uh,
that under 1,000 words. So
So are you consciously trying to write flash fiction, or is it like or do you write stories that are not flash, or so like anytime I write something flash, um occasionally it'll kind of come to me that way, me thinking like I think this is a flash piece, but then other times I've thought I was writing a flash story and it turns out not to be. I don't know if there's ever been a time for me where I thought I was writing a longer story and it turned out to only be flash, but I'm just curious about like is that the mode that you're mostly operating in, or is it more just whatever serves the story?
I think that's kind of the mode that I've kind of mostly operated in, and sort of writing wise. Again, I feel like when I first started writing Flash, because when I in graduate school, I did my thesis with a short story collection. And when I first started writing Flash, the stories would be more of like I was taking the short story and then trying to shrink it down into this 1,000 words or whatever, or 1,500, however you define Flash. And then those stories weren't really working very well because I was trying to take a short story and then make it into a Flash. Um, but I think Flash, whenever I go to write, Flash fits my personality type a little bit. This very kind of maybe more anxious bursts kind of that come out. And it's so, yeah, I feel like when I first started writing Flash, you have no idea what you're doing and whatnot. But I feel like whenever I go down to sit down to write a story, usually I try to, it finds that happy medium of like, under 1,000 words. But I feel like though, too, the more I write, flash fiction too, the shorter they tend to be. I don't know if that's just the fact of like getting better at writing flash, because I know a lot of flash fiction is like the implied, and it's like invites the reader to be sort of a participant in the story itself. So yeah, I guess that's a long way of saying, yeah, like when I go to write, I usually try to write flash fiction. And I think just a lot of it too is kind of time. I want to write longer fiction. That's something that I want to get in the habit of doing again, but like with time constraints and all that stuff too, it can be difficult. But yeah, some like when I sit down to write, most of the times I'm like in that flash mode, and I think I've kind of been in that mode for so long, it's hard to kind of switch back, or it might be difficult to switch back to maybe the short story mode.
We were talking briefly before we started recording that you said you set out to write a story a week, a flash story a week. I think that's amazing. I wish I could do that. What I mean, walk us through what that's like. I mean, is it a starting whatever day at the end of the week you see it as? I mean, is it sort of like you start a story every Monday and try to finish it by Friday or Sunday, or like what's like I'm interested in like the literal way you do it, and also just sort of where you're coming up with 50 story ideas a year. That's all. I'm impressed, basically.
So yeah, I'm a big premise guy. I like writing stories from a premise. And I think I get kind of distracted quite a bit. And so and then maybe that is kind of why I tend to operate so much in the flash mode too, because I'll be writing something, and then I'll see something else that is kind of pulling me in another direction. And I might be writing about the same themes and whatnot, but it's sort of kind of at a different angle. So like I'll get an idea, and a lot of the times those ideas are, where the worst thing I think I could do with my stories is when the premise becomes the story versus serving the story. I still want the stories to be kind of character driven and to have that emotional core, and not to have the premise to overtake everything and be the story. And a lot of the times, because that is a lot of stories to try to write, and I don't end up doing one a week. That's what I aim for, but um, a lot of the times that they're not very good, so they tend up just being practice and whatnot. But yeah, I do find myself kind of being just pulled like I'll see something randomly, and then it'll start, I'll feel a story germinating from an idea, or like something I just see in the wild, and then it won't necessarily fit into like what I'm working on, or whatever. And then maybe get so excited and I want to move on quickly to the next piece. So I feel like I kind of write in anxious little bursts. And like I try to write daily, and with the flash piece, it is a little easier to get to that story a week because they're shorter. But yeah, I'm, you know, 200, 300 words a day, and then they're revising it down and whatnot. It's not too bad, but a lot of the time they end up being just practices, so not very good. So, but yeah, I think the main thing is just kind of I don't know if it's the modern times and the attention spans that people have these days, but I just feel like keep getting pulled in different directions, and that yeah, so different ideas keep popping up, and then whether those ideas end up being good or not, I still end up writing about them or try to at least.
Well, yeah, I mean, still sounds like you're in a position though with even if it's not fruitful, you're like, all right, well, like I mean, no writing is wasted, of course, right? But just the idea of like, okay, well, no sweat, I've got a new one coming. Like there's
Yeah.
this, that level of like you got this kind of like optimum time commitment. You're focused on it, but if it doesn't work out, you haven't invested so much time where you're sort of devastated by the fact that it didn't amount to what you expected.
And I do go back to stories and revise them and
Sure.
whatnot too. And then once they're done or I get like a zero draft of them, I'm not just abandoning them to the next one. But so yeah, I just have a lot of ideas. I think I just random things I'll see that'll and I'll start thinking about them. I think it's kind of spurs the sort of a generative story or news story idea that kind of pulls me from the old one. So going from week to week isn't as bad as it sounds there.
So did the puzzle, it's this particular story pose any challenges to you?
Um, I feel like not really. I feel like in that moment with my when my wife is sort of in between jobs, and I feel like I write about stuckness so much that like the idea wasn't maybe too much of a challenge. I think that what really challenges me when I'm writing Flash in general is how much to leave unsaid and how much to put on the page is always a challenge when writing Flash fiction for me at least. Like I was mentioning earlier, when I first started writing Flash or discovered the mode, I tend to just kind of shrink down the short story. So there'd be a lot of like exposition or that would stunt the story and the pacing would be all weird. So yeah, I think the biggest challenge for me is always figuring out what can the reader refer that's not on the page and what needs to be said for the story to make sense.
Well, in this one, like in particular, like speaking of what's unsaid, right? We don't really know that much about the relationship
Yeah.
between the narrator and Fred. I mean, they're roommates. They seem to be close, but we don't know what that stems from, right? We don't know if these are like childhood friends, if they're, we just, and the beauty is doesn't matter, right? The story, like the suggestion is they know each other well enough that the narrator's leaving is, bothers Fred, both probably financially losing the roommate and the financial impact of that, but also just as a friendship. Um, I was going to point out the opening. I mean, like all readers, I guess, but I'm a sucker for like a great first line. And there's nothing like, especially crazy about your opening line, but we found the glued together puzzle on my last night in town. Like that's doing a lot of work in a good way, right? I mean, we get this strange image, like finding a glued together puzzle. Like already I'm like, okay, I want to keep reading. And then we get on my last night in town, which prompts readers to then wonder, where's he going? What's happened? And then uh, so I don't know. I think that there's, um, you're doing a really nice job in this story, like Flash generally does, of letting us infer and giving us just enough to be anchored in this moment without being burdened with, what is unnecessary exposition for this particular moment.
Yeah,
Uh,
and yeah, if this was a longer story, you definitely probably would need to know that relationship between Fred and the protagonist, and what that him leaving is putting what situation that's putting Fred in. So yeah, there'd be a lot more you would have to kind of explain. I find that with Flash, and it invites the reader to kind of be more of a participant in the story. And like you're saying, there's some things that you can kind of infer, like, oh, that their financial situation, that they're close and whatnot. But I think that Flash, maybe similar to poetry, is kind of like the reader is sort of becoming a part of the story where the scaffolding that they have in their head that's sort of propped up sort of relationships that they have similar, that they're able to kind of use that to fill in the gaps, versus where a longer story where you kind of get more understanding of the relationship. That's, I don't know if this makes any sense, but sort of maybe creates more of a distance between the reader and the character, because it's more of a fleshed out, or the character is more of a character and less of like what the maybe the reader is inferring or putting on the page that's not said by
Yeah.
chance.
We were just I visited Ron Mitchell, our editor in chief. I visited his publishing class the other day, and we were talking about there were some flash pieces that came in, and we were gave them to the students to talk about, and really what we were talking about then, it comes down to essentially sort of like a way to talk to these sort of undergrads about, kind of who are interested in publishing, both publishing their own work and also being involved in publishing. That, really the difference, the way that I approach, Ron and I approach reading Flash is, that it's just our expectations are different, right?
Yeah.
There are things, which is nothing groundbreaking here, of course, but just that Flash can get away with so many more things that a longer story sometimes can't, because our expectations are different.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of freedom in that space for writers to be able to say, like, well, I'm not beholden to, um, you know, um, conflict being the primary driving force, right? Maybe it's language, or maybe it's image, or maybe it's even sound, or some other kind of thing might be the driving force of it, that is, I think, harder to pull off in the longer. I mean, you can definitely do it in longer stories, but I think it's harder because our expectations, we've been
Yeah.
trained with all of our reading to expect certain things of longer work. So
Yeah,
um
and I think Flash 2 can be, when you read it, maybe like sometimes it's like when, especially if the writer is being innovated or it's kind of like a little bit different, then it can be kind of confusing and like, okay, what did I just read kind of thing. But I think the like a lasting impact, kind of like with poetry, you may not necessarily understand completely, like, okay, oh, what was the story about? What were the relationships about here? But if it leaves it like an impact on you and like you're still thinking about it later, uh, then I think that it accomplished it somewhat of what it was trying to do. I always like to think of Flash as sort of like a gut punch, where if if you're just standing there, you kind of get like punched in the stomach. Well, a short story is more of like, you're getting into this fight. You see the
okay.
jabs coming, and you're expecting stuff to happen and these certain beats to happen, and then the fight's going to end some way or the other. While Flash could be so many different things, and so it's more of kind of like a surprise versus of this sort of like you were saying, like you have a different expectation when it comes to the short story.
Man, you gave me another great metaphor to use. I like that. The Flash is a gut punch versus the short story being this kind of drawn out fight. Hey, that's good, man. I like it.
Yeah, because like
I
with a short story, I feel like you really you're in the fight, and like you were saying, you have those expectations. Well, Flash can be, it's so malleable. Well, I tend to kind of write it more of like your traditional kind of story with narrative and whatnot. There's more of like overly flowery Flash, and Flash, it works, it messes with form and structure and everything. So it's definitely, you could be a little bit more innovative with Flash fiction, where if you would try to do the same thing maybe in a short story, it wouldn't work as well. So
Yeah. So you mentioned that, you're trying to write a story a week, even if you fall short, you're trying to write a story a week, and you'll go back and revise the ones that feel like, there's something there. What's that process like for you? I mean, are you rewriting? Are you, like, is it more about the form? Is it, cutting? Is it expanding? Like, what's your sort of mode for revision?
so with Flash, it's a little easier to, like with a long story, to rewrite the whole thing. So every time I go to revise my Flash story, I try for first thing I'm thinking about is like, okay, what can I take off the page here that wouldn't hurt the story? And sometimes, obviously, you remove something, and you're never going to please everybody either. People are going to be like, "Oh, we should put that back in," and this person's like, "Oh, you should take that out." So figuring out kind of what should be left in and what should be left out. But yeah, basically, I just rewrite the story from the very beginning, and I find, it's easier, obviously, because it's shorter. But I find that it helps me get back into that mindset of when I was first writing the story, and with it being complete too, I can almost like inhabit the character a little bit more, or characters in the story. Obviously that'd be a lot more difficult on the like a 20-page story, but so yeah, just sort of I could dive right into the story and then write goes completely down versus of like looking, you know, nitty gritty parts or whatever, or like individual parts of the story, which kind of I think pulls me out a little bit of it. So I basically just start from the beginning and just rewrite the whole thing, and try to use that as sort of like have my mind be back into that piece when I was writing the piece, if that makes any sense. It's like I rambled a little bit there, but
No, no. Are you rewriting from memory or from the draft next to you, for example?
so and that's the brilliant thing. So like when I write the story, the first time I try to rewrite it, or maybe the second time, depending what feeling I have of the story, is I try to write it from memory. And usually, when you're rewriting it from memory, the things that stick the most are obviously things that should stay on the page. It's not foolproof, but yeah, once you've written it a few times, though, over and over again, like like one flash story that I'm working on, some writers have like maybe 5 drafts for a story. They'll rewrite the thing maybe like 10, 15 times. And then they'll change like a little thing here and a little thing there every time, or I'll change it back depending on whatever. But yeah, like rewriting it from memory, I think when the piece kind of flows out like that, I think is special because then for sure that it's working as it's sticking with you, the first time you wrote it.
So how much time will pass between that initial draft being, a complete first draft, whatever draft you would consider that, to then rewriting? How much time has passed?
It really depends on the story because a lot of times if I write something one of the stories we're talking about where I'm not like super sure of or think that, okay, well, this is necessarily probably not going to go anywhere. Um, then maybe it'll be like a week or so, and I'll try writing it. And if I can't, whatever, pump it up any, then I probably just retire it or put it in the practice pile. But if it's a story that I think has legs somewhat, then maybe 2 weeks later. But then if it's still, I feel like 2 weeks later after that, I feel like I'm with Flash. It's so easy to be constantly revising them, which is maybe a bad thing sometimes too, because you can never make it perfect. It's never finished. I think the revising process kind of stops is when the interest in the story sort of dies down, where maybe not necessarily not sending it out anymore, but when that boredom sets in with the piece, then I kind of stop going to it. And then obviously if it starts getting a bunch of rejections, then I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'll retire that story. So usually it's a 2-week span afterward, but if it's something I believe is sort of like, I think could go somewhere, then it's never stopping. So I'm always kind of going back to these stories and looking at them again and again.
What's crazy is you were the third person in this round of interviews for me who revises by rewriting completely.
Oh.
And it makes me think I'm doing it wrong because flash fiction, that strategy makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not questioning anybody's revision strategies, but I'm like, for me, I'm like, oh man, I don't think I could sort of just open a new file and restart writing the story. But I'm fascinated by that. And I think the way you describe it makes a lot of sense. Like this idea
Yeah.
of, if you can remember the parts you remember will be probably the most important things. And if you can't remember your story, then that might be an indicator of it not being.
Not working. And
No.
I don't know, for whatever reason, and I mean I do, especially when like very sentence level stuff will go in and just kind of, tweak it here and there. But like trying to just do a section here or a part here it feels very clinical. And I feel like I can't, whenever I go to revise that way, I can't necessarily get into the mindset as well of the character in the story. So for me, it's just easier to kind of write the story thing
Okay.
that way.
That's very cool. Like I said, it makes me think I'm doing it wrong. So what can you tell us about any books or stories or writers that were foundational to you starting out, and then maybe ones that you even returned to?
Yeah. So for Flash, I think maybe can I let my dog in? Can
Hey,
you hear on the thing at all?
I can hear a little bit. It's no big deal. It's fine.
Okay, I'm gonna let. Or were you let? Okay. Sorry about that.
No problem. Not a problem at all.
When it comes to Flash writing, when I first started getting into it, like my thesis advisor recommended Edgar Corrett, and then obviously Amy Hempel. And I feel like if you want to be a Flash writer, they're required reading. Uh, like I was saying earlier, when I first started writing Flash, I was just basically trying to shrink the short story down into like 1,000 words, and you can't write it that way. It doesn't work. So reading them, I think, really helped me figure out kind of it's sort of like reading a crap book on Flash, how Flash works and what to omit and what to leave on the page. Like Hempel in particular, like the story San Francisco, it's kind of a story about where a mother has passed or has died or passed away, and there's like this family that's kind of dealing with it's about the grief that the family is going through. And it's only like 2 pages long. But there's an emotional resonance in it, and the mother is never like strictly said that the mother is dead. It's sort of just sort of like implied, but there's so much stuff in it that's doing so much work. Like there's an earthquake that kind of represents like the shattering of this family or the fracturing of this family. You see how they deal with grief. Like one daughter is focused on kind of like this watch that kind of also represents sort of the passage of time and instead of dealing with the grief. And then the other daughter is sort of um, dealing with it through humor. So there's like so many things that is sort of working the story in such a tight little space. And at the end, you find out that the daughter one that's telling the story is telling the story to her mom that has passed on. So I just reading her work, I feel like just kind of helps me understand kind of how Flash works. And whenever I'm like kind of really struggling with my own writing, I go back to her quite a bit to just kind of see how a master does it, I guess,
Yeah.
and help to kind of understand. Like sometimes it's like I don't know how she's doing this, and a lot of the stories you will read, like Celia is back as one I remember, and at the end of it, it's I mean you could probably infer what's going on, but there it is kind of confusing story, but it still has that lasting impact. I think that what makes a Flash piece great, even if the reader maybe necessarily is like, I have no idea what I just read, and but it was interesting, and I'm still thinking about it later. So Hempel for sure, and then Correct because when I first started writing flat or writing in general, well, when I was writing as like when I was younger, it was just sort of like, I was doing it for fun. And then when I started to be maybe thinking about grad school and getting my MFA, I kind of thought about like how writing had to be serious or whatever. You had to be talking about important things and everything has to be, you know, very, very serious. But Correct, I think, is, with the humor, and he has a way of telling stories that are about serious things, but maybe aren't necessarily told in a serious way. And I think allowing, myself to read his stories, which inject that humor and that levity into pieces, uh, allowed me to kind of find my voice a little bit better, to know that Flash can be funny. And it doesn't, or writing itself maybe doesn't necessarily have to be overly serious. You could talk about something in kind of a goofy way. Uh, and yeah, so I mean, I feel like they're kind of like known as or maybe I'm sure there are other writers, but they're like huge, I think, Flash fiction writers, or maybe even like Lydia Davis and whatnot. But yeah, I always go back to them whenever I'm struggling kind of or feel like my writing itself isn't necessarily working. So
Cool. So, and I mean, in addition to those two writers I wish they were both read more than what they are. Unfortunately, they're probably not read as widely. Like I don't have students. I would bet my students are not aware of Amy Hempel, which is partly my fault, probably for not making them aware of her. But so are there any other writers you think we should be reading? Either contemporary, sort of forgotten writers, doesn't matter.
so I don't have you ever heard of The Dog Walker at all?
I have not.
Okay, it's by app or author Bradford. They're short stories. It's not Flash. But it is I don't know. It's a lot of the stories are very strange, and the protagonist is in the story. It's very nonchalant, and these weird things are just sort of happening to him, and he just kind of takes it and we just kind of drifts through the story somewhat. And a lot of the stories are very like they just kind of end abruptly, they feel like. And I feel like some might say they're just weird to be weird's sake, but there's something interesting underneath them somewhat. Um, and he has a very kind of straightforward kind of prose style, which I think matches my style somewhat. Um, but yeah, there's just something about like all these strange people interacting. And I think there's like maybe not necessarily like a huge message in every little thing, every piece that he writes, but like the overall theme of the book is, you know, we may not know all these bizarre, like why all these bizarre things are happening to us, but they stick to us, and then down the line we might understand them better. So I'd recommend reading The Dog Walker by him, and he also has a book, short story collection called Turtle Face. So if you like weird, interesting stories, and I think too with Corette and with The Dog Walker here, like just I'm a big premise guy, like I said, where a story starts with some sort of like kind of like what the puzzle there story with like this interesting line. You're like, oh my God, I just want to know more. And with Corette, I think he's helps with understanding how to write, like I said earlier, how to write a story where the premise is serving the story and the versus the story serving the premise. And same thing with author Bradford. They have these interesting premises, but they never really overtake the story. The story is still character driven. There's still like an emotional resonance there. So
Oh, cool. I will have to check that out. This not was not somebody on my radar. So another reason why I love asking these questions because it gives me books to add to my never-ending pile. Um, last question. Can you tell us what you're working on or what you've got coming? You have a book coming out next year, so
So, I mean, yep, I have one with Malarkey Books coming out in April of 2027. And so I'm just kind of been going through the process of that. I still fairly new to all this stuff. I didn't really, get serious about writing until way later in life. I probably, I went to J school or journalism school and I worked as a journalist for a while. And then I just started writing randomly about 10 years ago, writing kind of fiction and everything in between. And so I really feel like I'm kind of half the time running around like a chicken with running around with its head cut off, to borrow a cliche there. So yeah, just understanding kind of like figuring out the order of the collection, because it is a lot of, for a whole kind of a book of flash fiction, it's like there's like 78 different flash pieces in there. So figuring out how to order that, if I wanted to divide it up into different subsections or what, and then dealing like we're figuring out the cover right now. And so that, and I don't know how many weeks, what do we are like 4, 5, 6 weeks in. So probably should be on my seventh flash peak. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, but I'm also like, just constantly writing, constantly seeing different things and pulling me in one direction or the other and trying to kind of chug along with those writing a different story every week. But yeah, the book thing has been interesting to go through. It's to see kind of the process.
yeah, I can imagine. I mean, putting a story collection is hard enough. I can't imagine the difficulty of trying to figure out movement and arc and variance and all of those
Yeah.
things when you have
And
so many
then
pieces.
and then I have a tendency to write a bunch. Some flash of I write is like kind of has magical realism or like kind of more surreal elements into them, and then I have more grounded work like the puzzle. And so sometimes they don't fit together, but I feel like the themes wise, I feel like there's always that underlying theme in my stories of like stuck and like being trapped in this routine and hoping to break free in some sense of like finding out what is your true purpose of life, and or are we fated to the sort of deterministic or fatalistic sort of, like this is as far as we go kind of thing. So
Well, yeah, that's very cool. I'm happy that a collection of your work is going to be available for readers. Um, you can find a copy of the puzzle, or not a copy, but you can find the puzzle in a copy of the fall 2025 issue of SIR. You can go to usi.edu // SIR to find out how to purchase a copy. And the link will be in the description below. Thanks again, Will. It was a real pleasure chatting with you and hearing your ideas. And I'm definitely going to steal your metaphors. I will give you credit, but I'll steal your metaphors to talk to my students about Flash. I appreciate you taking the time.
no problem. I appreciate you having me here. Like I said, whenever I get an opportunity, it doesn't happen often. Whenever I get an opportunity to talk about my work, even if I am kind of nervous about it, it's always cool, and I always appreciate the chance.
Well, no problem. I'm happy to have you.
Thanks.
Thanks again.